Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this special Frontline edition of our quarterly series, Beyond the Headlines on the Frontline. I'm Gina Schmaling, and I'm thrilled to welcome you today. Today's briefing, Pathways to Youth Violence, Understanding the Threat Landscape, comes at a critical time. Together, we'll examine past extremist school shootings, the ongoing threat of online hate and violence targeting young people, and the concrete steps ADL, with your partnership, is taking to confront these dangers and help keep students safe. I'm honored to be joined by two of my extraordinary colleagues. Alex Friedfeld, Associate Director of Investigative Research at ADL Center on Extremism, who leads a team tracking extremist groups and movements, has trained thousands of federal, state, and local law enforcement officers, and frequently represents ADL in national and international media, including CNN, NBC, and The Guardian. Sarah Schinbach, Director of Education Advocacy at National Affairs, leads the organization's efforts to advocate against anti-Semitism in K-12 public schools. Sarah has worked with government officials, university administrators, and community leaders on understanding Jewish experiences of contemporary anti-Semitism. Prior to joining ADL, Sarah was an educator and a civil litigator. Together, they'll walk us through our newly published interactive timeline of two connected extremist school shootings. Recent COE articles such as From Gore to Hate, How Watch People Die Serves as a Gateway to Extremism. That's the name of a website. As well as our report, Raised for the Reich, How White Supremacists Are Recruiting Teens for On-the-Ground Action. They will also share ADL strategies for prevention and advocacy. Before we begin, please note that, like the name of the website I just mentioned, today's discussion includes details about violent incidents that some might find difficult. Finally, on a good note, I want to acknowledge you, our donors and our frontline allies. Your support makes this work possible. Because of your commitment and generosity, ADL can uncover threats, educate families and educators, and push for real solutions to keep our communities safe. Thank you for standing with us. With that, let's dive in. Alex, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Gina. And thank you all for being here today to talk about an incredibly important issue. So as Gina said, my name is Alex Friedfeld. I'm the Associate Director of Investigative Research. And today what I'd like to do is talk about the center's latest project, looking at how extremism and gore spaces online are generating offline violence, particularly among kids. This project was born earlier this year after the country witnessed two school shootings in a 5-week span, and the results are what I'd like to share today. So I'm going to share my screen, 1 second. So let's start with those two cases. On December 16th, 2024, a 15-year-old named Natalie Rupnow walked into her school in Madison, Wisconsin with two handguns and opened fire, killing 2 people and injuring 6 others before taking her life. Less than 5 weeks later, and hundreds of miles away, a 17-year-old named Solomon Henderson retrieved a handgun that he had stashed in the bathroom of his high school in Nashville, Tennessee, confronted a female student, and then shot and killed her. He fired a few more shots, injuring 2 other students before he shot himself. Now, in the aftermath of these horrific incidents, we at the Center on Extremism did what we always do. We searched the internet for the perpetrator's online activity, tracing the shooter's footprints across a range of social media platforms, both mainstream and fringe, until we could form a clear picture of the attacker's mindset and motivation leading up to the act. This is often painstaking work, combing through every piece of media that we can find linked to the perpetrator, looking for things like usernames, hobbies, locations, anything really that can help us find other spaces where they operate online. So as an example of what this process looks like, let's use Solomon Henderson. We started from a manifesto that Henderson himself shared on X prior to carrying out the attack. It appears that Henderson actually wanted to live stream his shooting to bring viewers along for the ride, and I'll talk a little bit more about that phenomenon in a bit. So Henderson provided a list of social media accounts that he owned, and we ran down every lead that we could, ultimately finding accounts on incel boards, Columbine fandom forums, Discord, Instagram, TikTok, and even SoundCloud. With each new piece of information that we found, an alarming picture began to cohere. We found that although Rootnow and Henderson had never met, they hung out in the same digital spaces, ones that traffic in extremist ideologies and gore. Sites where you could find a user praising Pulse nightclub shooter Omar Mateen in one post before sharing a clip of white supremacists murdering Muslims in New Zealand in the next. Over the last few years, spaces like these have grown in prominence and reach. Rather than adhering to any one particular ideology, these communities revel in destruction, turning violence into social currency by encouraging its users to carry out violent acts themselves and ultimately glorifying those that do. These people are united in their hatred of the world and their desire to make it hurt. Now, we at the Center of Extremism have been dealing with the repercussions of these spaces for years now, largely as it relates to threats, which have been occurring at a greater frequency. And that's why we thought this project was urgent. So let's start with the first part of this project, and that is our timeline, which dove in detail into the digital footprints of Rootnow and Henderson. The timeline begins in June 2023, 18 months before Rootnow's attacks and 19 months before Henderson's, when both kids registered accounts at the website watchpeopledie.com. I'm going to talk about this site in more depth in a few moments, but it's exactly what you think. It's a website where people can go and watch videos of people dying amongst other horrific kinds of things. Now, each dot you see on the screen represents an important moment in these kids' online journey, where they joined a new problematic website, expressed a hateful or extremist thought, or interacted with extremist material. In the interest of time, I'm not going to walk through the entire thing, but I encourage everyone to please go to our website after this call and click around if you have a few free minutes. But here is a sampling of what we found for Rootnow. She shared Tumblr content glorifying the Columbine killers in August of 2023, wrote a note saying that she had planned out her attack as early as October 2023. She followed extremist accounts on Watch People Die, and even joined a private group chat started that same day by an individual who ultimately carried out a live-streamed attack on a Turkish mosque. Now, as for Henderson, he participated in the true crime community, which is an internet subculture that often engages in fandom for mass killers. He often frequented incel spaces, and he referred to himself as an accelerationist, which is a form of white supremacy whose adherents believe that society needs to collapse so that white people can rule. Of note, Henderson was very aware of Rootnow, as he shared a fan edit of her on TikTok. After her attack, he put her name in one of his usernames, and he cited her as an inspiration for his own shooting. Now, this last point is incredibly important because it underscores just how dangerous these spaces are. These people do not want their violence to be a one-time thing. They want to inspire others to follow their lead and leave a string of bodies across the world for the rest of the community's entertainment. And that's the reason that Henderson tried to live stream his attack. It was explicitly to entertain this community and gain social clout, even if he died before he could ever enjoy it. So there's a few takeaways of note from this project. First, these cases illustrate how regular exposure to violent and extremist content online can lead to offline violence. Both Rootnow and Henderson were immersed in communities that glorified extremist killers of all kinds, which helped to normalize their violent urges. Second, these kids did not become killers right away. There was a radicalization process, one that began with them passively consuming content, then reposting content, then sharing their own content that they created before ultimately carrying out an attack. This process took about 18 months, and it could have potentially been impeded if their descent was spotted by people who recognized the warning signs, or if they faced stricter content restrictions. Third, The spaces that Roopnow and Henderson frequented are incredibly powerful, and that they are able to manipulate vulnerable users via their social reward structures and by blasting people with constant encouragement by extremist influencers. These are often lonely and angry kids who find solace and understanding in these violent communities. And when you have that desire to belong, and your so-called friends are telling you to commit violence, and you're reading manifestos from killers telling you to imitate that, well, this can quickly turn feelings of alienation into a desire to carry out and act yourself. Lastly, these cases challenge assumptions about who is likely to carry out extremist violence. Um, Even though school shooters are overwhelmingly young white men, Roopnow in this case was a teenage girl and Henderson was Black. So in addition to the timeline, we did put together a resource as well on watchpeopledie.com, which is the Gore website that Roopnow and Henderson joined in the same month. And again, you can find this on the landing page for this project. Watch People Die is a forum where users can post and view real images and videos of violence, including murders, torture, rape, suicides, and animal killings. The forum originated on Reddit before it got banned, and today it mirrors its original home, with boards centered around specific types of violence and gore. Our investigation into Watch People Die found that this website has an active white supremacist network, one that both Roopnow and Henderson engaged with. But even outside this network, it's distressingly easy to find extremist manifestos that are unedited, unannotated, and accessible to all, allowing any user to consume this extremist content without context about the disinformation included within them. Unsurprisingly, there's also many videos of extremist mass killings. Among the most popular are those that were streamed using body cams, much like Henderson wanted to do. This choice allows viewers to vicariously experience the bloodshed from the shooter's perspective as they carry out their attacks, and as a result, they're very popular. For example, the top post with footage of the Christchurch attack back in 2019 in New Zealand has nearly 700,000 views alone. And again, that is just one version of, or one iteration of that clip. So beyond this raw content, people, including Henderson, regularly share fan edits of mass killings, and there's a community that is based around memifying extremist and non-extremist killers. Now, this matters because it normalizes and sugarcoats the horrific acts that these people did. In the exact same way that people, consume fan edits, for example, of their favorite athletes, movie stars, and celebrities, people are watching cutesy videos of mass killers that intentionally glorifies them and, by extension, their murders, which in turn helps to normalize this horrific content. So the third new piece that we put out was a report looking at white supremacist tactics for recruiting kids to join their cause. The impetus for this piece was a series of events that happened within a month of each other at the beginning of this year. First, in January 2025, 3 teenage boys in Florida were convicted of a spree of anti-Semitic vandalisms in Pensacola, which included spray painting hate symbols and as well as throwing bricks through the windows of a Chabad Jewish center and a synagogue. The boys were discovered to have been a part of a white supremacist crew for boys under the age of 18 called Blood and Soil Crew, or 2119. That same month, at least one student at a high school in Virginia was caught distributing propaganda for a white supremacist group whose social media claims to be preparing white youth for a so-called, invisible race war that they believe is being waged against white people. And just a few weeks later, in February 2025, a white supremacist network of affiliated so-called youth clubs activated online. And within 2 months, members of these clubs were distributing hateful propaganda and holding training events in their local communities. Though incidents like the ones I just described are still limited, they are still important because efforts to recruit young people into white supremacist movements puts young people, their families, and their communities in danger, and it threatens efforts to create a just and equitable world. So let's start with the last of those stories that I mentioned, and that is the youth clubs. which are the latest iteration of white supremacist efforts to recruit children. These youth clubs are comprised of a network of loosely affiliated regional chapters that seek to organize boys under the age of 18 to engage in hateful activities before adulthood. And they're notable for their wide geographic reach and their offline activity. The network seems to emulate the Active Club network, which is a older white supremacist kind of crew who view themselves as fighters training for a battle against the system that they believe is aiming to destroy the white race. These youth clubs copy Active Clubs in their slogans, their propaganda, their logos, and even in their names. Since the beginning of April, the Youth Club Network has been active in distributing propaganda, holding mixed martial arts training events, and staging group hikes, camping trips, and other activities. Now, the Youth Club Network was not the first attempt, it was not the first recent attempt by young white supremacists to create dedicated white supremacist clubs for other, essentially, kids. You've got Cali Youth, which was formed in California in 2024 and has since engaged in propaganda tags as well as emphasizing combat sports. You've got the Pacific Northwest Youth, which, as the name implies, was formed in the Pacific Northwest. And it also emphasizes outdoor fitness and has held numerous sticker campaigns throughout Oregon and Washington. And lastly, you've got Blood and Soil Crew, aka 2119, which is the white supremacist group that formed in Florida in 2022 and garnered attention at the end of last year and beginning of this year for the actions of those 3 teenage boys. White supremacists are also using technology to directly radicalize young people they randomly meet on the internet while using Omegle knockoffs like Ome TV. During these interactions, white supremacists use offensive language while speaking with young people and will often try to goad them into hateful, racist, and anti-Semitic behavior. We at the Center are aware of at least 20 white supremacists who use Ome TV and similar platforms to troll people, including children. And the most prolific abusers of these platforms are typically connected to the anti-Semitic and white supremacist Goyim Defense League. Now, that network's leader, John Minadeo, has claimed that these platforms are a tool for grooming, specifically for grooming the youth to hate. And GDL-affiliated live streamers, including Minadeo and other prominent figures, regularly interact with young people. These interactions typically involve streamers sharing white supremacist rhetoric while encouraging kids to endorse extremist ideologies or perform racist acts like Hitler salutes. Afterwards, the interactions are then clipped and shared for entertainment. So again, there's a bunch of different resources on our new landing page, and I encourage everyone to please look at it. But the last thing that I'm going to cover today is 764, which first formed in 2021, but since then has been wreaking havoc, particularly when it comes to kids. So 764 is a decentralized global network of online communities that glorify violence and engage in a range of criminal activities, including sextortion, the distribution of child sex abuse material, swatting, and doxing. This is a network that is known for targeting and exploiting vulnerable individuals online, in particular children. Their goal is to sow chaos, and their ideology is deeply rooted in nihilism and misanthropy, promoting a worldview that rejects moral norms and sees no value at all in human life. Now, within 764, members gain status through cruelty and abuse, with the most extreme and degrading acts or with people being rewarded for the most extreme and degrading acts that they can coerce their victims into committing. Victims are often pressured to engage in increasingly extreme behaviors to test their so-called loyalty to their abusers, doing things like killing family pets or asphyxiating themselves. Some 764 members have even gone so far as to encourage victims to commit suicide on live stream or carry out a mass shooting for this community's entertainment. Self-harm, particularly cutting, is also an extremely common practice among individuals associated with 764. One of the network's most disturbing practices is cut signing, in which abusers demand that their victims carve the abuser's name into their skin in order to, again, attract this twisted form of social currency. And if the victim refuses any of these orders, abusers will threaten to share their so-called lore book, basically a digital compilation of the victim's compromising photos and videos, private messages, personal information, things like that, and basically blackmail them, right? Threatening to share this information with the victim's family and friends, which is a tool for these guys to prevent their victims from reporting their abuse until it's too late. Now, as I said, 764 has been linked to a range of criminal activity, and you can see 4 cases here. But in May, the FBI said that they've opened up over 250 investigations related to this network. And about 2 weeks ago, a 764 guy was arrested for possessing child porn. So again, this is still a very active threat. So why does this all matter? For one, this is obviously already having a direct impact on children, either with them getting caught up in these networks or explicitly being targeted by them. And it's resulting in a lot of criminal activity. But the other reason that we're talking about this is because the attacks that, like the ones that happened in Madison and Nashville, are unfortunately likely to keep happening until we as a society decide to do something about these online spaces that blend gore and extremism and the ways they are actively poisoning young people's minds. Because of these spaces, the threat landscape is more diffuse than it has ever been. And when there is no consistent ideology binding attackers to their targets, it makes it even harder to prepare for an attack, even though we know that the next strike is likely somewhere on the horizon. In fact, it's already happened again, twice. Less than 3 weeks ago, 23-year-old Robin Westman opened fire at his old school in Minneapolis, killing 2 children and injuring 21 other people before taking their own life. Just like in the other cases that I described earlier, our team started tracking down his online footprint. And what we found was that while Westman did not hold a consistent or unified ideology, he was obsessed with mass killers, similar to Rupnow and Henderson. Much like the Christchurch killer, Westman wrote things on his gun, and these included numerous slurs, extremist symbols, and references to extremist mass shooters. But one name in particular caught our attention, and that was Natalie Rupnow's. Again, these killers do not envision themselves as lone actors. They want other people to follow in their footsteps and kill just like them, and evidence suggests that it's working. Just last week, while the world was understandably focused on the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a 16-year-old named Desmond Holley opened fire at his Colorado high school, wounding 2 students before killing himself. Authorities stated that Holley had been radicalized by some extremist network, but didn't elaborate further. And it was our researchers at the Center on Extremism, who discovered and publicized that Holley was obsessed with mass killers, that he had an account on Watch People Die, where he commented on posts about mass killings in Parkland and Buffalo. He collected tactical gear and adorned it with extremist symbols like the other mass killers whose content he had been watching. And he shared his own content emulating Rupnow and the Columbine shooters, and while filling his social media with hateful iconography. And much like Henderson, Holley spoke about live streaming his attack in order to entertain others. Now, in addition to Westman and Holley, COE has tracked at least 3 other cases globally involving kids obsessed with mass killers who plotted attacks. We've seen a 15-year-old arrested in the UK who was active on gore websites and similarly idolized killers who got arrested for plotting to attack a school. We saw a 15-year-old in Morocco with the same exact profile trying to live stream a stabbing. And there was a mass killer obsessed 13-year-old in Washington State who was arrested with 23 guns after posting about his intentions to kill, right? And again, this is just in the last 3 weeks. The unfortunate nature of all of this is that there is only so much that hardening schools can do to adjust this challenge. At best, physical security measures can mitigate a nightmare scenario, but it cannot stop a child from succumbing to this toxic material and picking up a gun in the first place. And until we address these spaces together, this is likely to keep happening. So those are our findings. But I want to wrap up in these last few minutes by talking about what we at the ADL have been doing to deal with this very real crisis. So the first thing is that we did create this landing page, right, which does have several resources that are designed to help educate families, communities, schools, about the dangers that these virtual spaces and extremist movements pose, right? And the warning signs that are out there. We've shared these resources as well with law enforcement in order to help educate them about these particular issues so that they can be better informed while they are investigating similar cases. In addition, we shared a list of 20 websites that we are encouraging schools to consider blocking so that children cannot access them. And we shared this to over 16,000 superintendents across the country. Now, to be clear, none of these websites are associated with a particular group or individual, but they were instead selected because of the way that they combine extremist and gore content like watchpeopledie.com does. These are really the worst of the worst. And if there was a rating system for them, they would be rated for mature audiences only, if they even got a rating at all. And lastly, we've been reaching out to internet service providers to try and open a dialogue with them so that they can better address these spaces. Because the fact of the matter is that a lot of these companies are privately owned. And so it's up to the companies running them about whether or not they want to continue to host. And so we are using our resources and our relationships at the ADL to have these conversations in the hopes of having an impact in the future. So I will stop there and I will pass it to my colleague, Sarah.
Thank you, Alex, for sharing all of that information with us. So, those of you who are listening into this, you might be asking yourselves, what can I do after learning everything that Alex has just shared? And that's where advocacy comes in. We can go to the next slide. So this slide shares the 4 main steps of effective advocacy. And once you've mastered them, you'll be ready to be an effective advocate on any topic. And I know obviously today we're talking about how to prevent these types of atrocities from occurring. So our 4 steps: share a personal story, communicate data, have a clear ask, and thank the person that you're meeting with. Sharing a personal story illustrates the issue that you're talking about. When you share one, the person who you're talking to will understand why this issue matters to you on a human level. And this is how you can inspire the person who you're talking to act and make change. While personal stories are a powerful way to make an issue real, data helps show that your personal story is not an isolated one, but part of a broader trend or a crisis. And by the end of your meeting, it's essential to make a clear, attainable, and specific ask. Be clear about what you want to happen and by whom, and directly request actions that you want taken. And then finally, it's important to thank your audience for their time in meeting with you. It recognizes their effort in supporting you. So we can go to the next slide. Putting all of these things together, you can see here's a sample letter advocating from a parent to a principal at a school, advocating for the school to implement tighter internet filters on the school servers to help prevent mass casualties, like Alex shared with us a little bit ago. And here you can see the 4 elements that make this an effective letter. So on the top, you can see the personal narrative. This parent talking about learning that their child has accessed this disturbing content during school hours and how it affected their child. You can also see in our next section data. You can see this parent discussing some of the data that Alex shared with us. You can see the actual ask as we get more toward the bottom of the letter, and also starting the letter, which is incredibly effective. And then finally, you can see how this parent thanks the principal for taking the time. So this is just a sample putting all of these advocacy steps together. All right, we can go to the next slide. So now we're going to just talk briefly about what families can do to protect their children from violent or indoctrinating online spaces. Next slide. So the first thing that parents, family members, friends, people who just have children in their lives, things that you can do to help protect them. So you can monitor content that children access across platforms. Be aware of what the kids in your life are doing online, whether that means talking to them about it, just keeping a close eye, or actually monitoring what they're doing. Next, set appropriate boundaries for online engagement. Talk to your kids about the boundaries that you're setting and why you're setting them. It's important for kids to understand why. Third, creating an open dialogue about what children are encountering online. Our children are getting exposed to these things, whether we talk to them about it or not. So make sure that you're talking to the children in your lives about these things online and just really keeping those lines of communication open. Next, empowering children with the tools to recognize and respond to the harmful content that they're seeing. We can't assume that children understand that the things that they're seeing are even harmful in the first place. So, really having those conversations with them and empowering them is a huge step. And then finally, foster a positive digital environment at home. All right, now we have about 20 minutes for some Q&A from all of you in attendance during today's call. Before we go into that, we asked frontline members to share how the young people in their lives have been impacted by online hate or extremist violence. In their response, members said that they felt that young people are too often considering online resources as more important than their own parents, teachers, and community leaders. One member reflected on their 5 nieces and nephews in university and how they all felt that they had to leave their home city to go to a school that they felt was safe for Jews. Thank you to all of you who shared your concerns and stories with us in advance of today's call. And now we will get to your important questions. All right, Alex, this first question is for you. What, if anything, can be done to shut down or block or hold platforms like Watch People Die or the true crime community accountable?
It's a very important question. So one of the challenges when it comes to these websites, as I mentioned at the end of my presentation, is that they are privately owned, and often their internet service providers are based overseas. They operate overseas, and so it's incredibly difficult to get them fully removed. But that said, I think there are things that still can be done to try and limit the ability of these platforms, right, to spread their hateful content to to young people and really to the broader community. First, right, much like we ask superintendents across the country, is I think that folks in schools, right, places that are providing internet access to children, it's not unreasonable to ask them to, hey, block these websites on their own servers to make sure that they're not being able to be accessed, right? Because the fact of the matter is these websites, as I mentioned, are the worst of the worst, and they have absolutely no educational value, right? And this is something that similarly families on their own can do as well. Be aware of how your kids are using the internet or your loved ones are using the internet. And if needed, right, put those guardrails on. Again, I can promise you I've spent way too much time in these spaces. There is absolutely nothing of value here. It is only death and destruction. Beyond that, I think this is something, right, that people can talk to elected officials about, right? This is an issue that affects all of our communities. And if private companies are not willing to handle these issues on their own, there may be an opportunity for the public sector, right, the government, to use their influence and create incentive structures and things of that nature that encourage companies to do the right thing here, right? And make sure that Americans are being protected proactively from the harms that exist on the internet. So there's absolutely a space here for advocacy with public officials to leverage, our community's power to hold these companies responsible.
Thank you, Alex. This next question is also for you. Where are extremist groups currently gaining the most ground in recruiting young people online?
Hmm. It's an excellent question. Another really good question. The fact is, is that we see extremism, really blossoming across the internet. We have seen a few mainstream platforms loosen their content moderation in ways that, previously 3, 4 years ago, these sites would not have allowed extremists on their platform and not allowed hateful messaging. But for whatever reason, they have decided to loosen their content moderation standards, which in turn has allowed this hate to blossom on these platforms. But the fact is, right, is that what was previously fringe is now increasingly becoming common in websites that were previously fringe are becoming increasingly common on the internet, right? So I really hope for your sakes you've never heard of the website Watch People Die before this presentation. But the fact is that they get hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of viewers every day, right? In fact, the amount of people who visited the site last Wednesday on September 10th in the wake of the Kirk assassination was so high that it crashed the website servers, right? So the fact is that there is just a myriad of new platforms, new communities that are springing up with all these different new types of websites and names, most folks have never heard of, but the people who have heard of them are young people who are very active online that know how to navigate these different platforms, right? They hear about a website on a different websites and they go because they're curious and they go and explore. And so we have seen, not just extremist content on mainstream platforms, but outlinks as well, right, on these platforms. So they may not do the really bad stuff on the mainstream platform, but they'll give you a link, for example, to Watch People Die so that you can click on it and go view the content there. But this is very much a challenge that society is grappling with, which is there is just a myriad of websites and online communities dedicated to this type of hate.
So, going off of that, what role should Congress or policymakers play in protecting youth from exposure to online hate and violence?
Yeah, I think Congress has a big role to play in all of this, right? As I said before, if private companies can't regulate or won't regulate themselves, then it's incumbent on Congress as the representatives of the people to take that, responsibility upon themselves to make sure, right, that kids aren't going to websites like Watch People Die. And I don't think that's unreasonable, right? I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that Congress and our representatives will do everything possible to keep our children safe, to ensure that they are not going on websites where they are being blasted by microphones, telling them to kill themselves, to kill others, to kill their pets, to do other horrific things, right? So ways that the government could potentially help here. They could expand investments in community-based violence prevention programs, right, which are explicitly designed to create off-ramps for at-risk people. In addition, right, they could use, as I mentioned before, their power to push companies, to hold companies accountable for the harms that they are currently causing, right? They can enhance transparency, right? Tell these companies to enhance the transparency about how they moderate, process, handle online content that could conceivably incite violence. And again, potentially create barriers to prevent bad actors from sharing this information, or even a little thing like delaying live streaming, right? Because we have seen several cases where mass killers have tried to live stream their attacks in order to entertain the communities that they're coming from, right? So putting a delay of some kind on these or limiting who can live stream at a given point could be enormously helpful in combating these types of things. And then lastly, of course, enhancing education efforts and awareness in schools, really trying to prioritize, this type, what's going on, or educating people about what's going on, increasing media literacy and things of that nature in schools, right? Prioritizing this is something that we all need to deal with, because the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, we as a community are bearing the costs of these choices.
Mhm. Do you find that these sorts of sites or, these influencers are also directing their messages toward adults, or is it primarily to youth?
So it depends on the group or movement. In terms of the groups and the movement that I talked extensively about today, um, they are community agnostic. They kind of blast all of this stuff out there. And there is lots of evidence that in addition to kids, right, there are plenty of adults who are consuming this content for a variety of different reasons, primarily entertainment, right? But they're consuming this on a regular basis as well, which is obviously not healthy. That said, I think the issue with children is particularly more acute because these are vulnerable and impressionable people, right? They're kids. So they are still learning, how do I grapple with the world? How do I exist in this world? And what we're seeing is that these spaces have a narrative, one that says there is no hope for the future. You are nobody. And the only way that you can make your voice heard is by doing an act of violence to entertain us. And then if you do it, we will glorify you. We'll make fan edits of you. We'll turn you into a hero that others should be emulated, right? And so for kids, right? I mean, remember being a teenager, right? It's a very confusing time. You've got a lot of emotions and hormones running through you, right? And you are feeling a wide range of things, right? And you're feeling very unsure. So to have this message that, if you're feeling these senses of alienation and anger, right? To have this message that says, I know how to fix that for you. Go pick up a gun is incredibly dangerous.
Thank you. The next question goes off of that, but I think I'm fine to handle the next one. The question is, what resources does ADL offer for parents, educators, and communities to help students and children understand extremism and mass shooting events? So, ADL offers comprehensive educational resources to help parents, educators, and communities address extremism and mass shooting events with students and children. The resources are designed to facilitate difficult conversations while ensuring that young people feel safe and supported. So before talking specifically about those resources, I do want to point to a resource that I will share with all of you in a little bit. One resource is called How to Advocate for Your Students in Their K-12 Schools. And this resource, it goes over the 4 steps of advocacy that I mentioned before. It will also help you understand how schools are structured, who should I talk to about the different things that I'm trying to advocate for. It will help you clarify your advocacy goals, map the system of public and independent schools, and identify the proper target for your advocacy. It will also help you prepare for those conversations. Now, specifically talking to youth, we have a resource called we have Table Talk Family Conversations, which provide tips and strategies for parents and families to have roundtable discussions with youth about current events, world events, or news. And we have one entitled Gun Violence and Mass Shootings that is specifically on point here. This one is a resource that offers tools and strategies to parents and families on how to discuss these sensitive and scary and painful topics around mass shootings. We also have resources for educators. We have one entitled Empowering Young People in the Aftermath of Hate, and that offers guidelines for leading classroom discussions and ensuring that children feel safe and secure in their own environment while discussing these issues. And then we also offer a mini lesson for educators, all about extremist recruitment of young people. And that provides helpful approaches that educators can use in talking with young people about extremism and how to help young people resist those efforts and even counter them. So we will share all of those links with you. Alex, the next question is for you. How does COE collaborate with law enforcement when identifying threats in these spaces?
Yeah, so that is a major part of the work that we do. We have a fantastic threat monitoring unit that is operating around the clock, looking for threats and potential or threats to the community, right? People who are openly talking about doing harm. We have over the last few years trained these analysts in procedures on how to sift through all of these threats in order to best identify those that are the highest risk. And we have also built an incredible technology to allow us to deal with this problem, because as you can imagine, with the internet, there is a lot of threatening and violent fantasies, threatening language and violent fantasies happening all the time, right? And dealing with threats are particularly unique, particularly when they come from the internet, because some folks like to say that it's like looking for the needle in the haystack, right? You're trying to find the one threat that is real so that way we can action it. But the fact of the matter is, it's looking for a needle in the haystack while that haystack is being shot at you, right? So you need to act quickly to grab that needle before it goes by you. Otherwise, tragedy can happen, right? So we have this technology, we have this amazing team that is doing this work around the clock, diligently going through all of the threatening messages that we find so that we can share it with our law enforcement partners. And one of the great things about the ADL and all of our regional offices is that we have incredible relationships with law enforcement at every level, whether it's the federal, state, and local. So if we come across an individual or a user that we believe poses a threat to the community, we are able to action that right away, get it into the right people's hands so that they can do their jobs and investigate quickly in order to hopefully prevent tragedy.
All right. Thank you, Alex. It looks like we have one more question that has come in from from viewers. So if any of you have any additional questions, please get them in now. So Alex, the last question that I have for you is, from your perspective, how has the FBI's approach to youth radicalization and extremist threats evolved recently?
It's a great question and an important one. And I will say I think it's too soon to really tell. This is an issue that we're all grappling with that has really exploded over the last few months. As I said, in just the last 3 weeks, we have seen several cases where folks coming from these communities either actually carried out an attack or were arrested while doing so. And so I think much like us, much like everybody, they're trying to figure out how can they best address this issue. I will say, right, and I'll cite that number that came out in June, right, the fact that they have opened over 250 cases pertaining to 764, which was that awful network that targets kids, which shows that this is something on their radar. It is something that they're dealing with, and they're, again, like all of us, trying to grapple with it. So it's still a little too soon. Time will tell how they, evolve to meet this challenge. But we at the ADL will continue to provide our expertise, our findings, and work with them because at the end of the day, we're all here to try and keep people safe.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. With that, I am going to turn this over to Gina for some closing remarks for the group.
Thank you, Alex and Sarah, for helping us better understand this urgent threat and how ADL is leading the response. And thank you to all of you, our frontline members, for being here today and for your questions. The truth is that this work is only possible because of you. Your generosity fuels ADL's ability to uncover dangerous extremist networks like the ones that we just heard about, equip schools and families with critical tools, and advocate for solutions that keep young people safe. If today's briefing resonated with you, I encourage you to stay engaged. Share what you learned, invite others to join these conversations, and continue supporting ADL's work. Together, we are confronting extremism before it takes root and building safer schools and communities for the next generation. Keep an eye out for a follow-up email. We'll be sending the recording of today's session along with additional resources and ways to take action. If you're part of a local community group, interfaith network, or policy circle, share what you learned today and know that we're here to help you bring these conversations to your community. And as always, please don't hesitate to reach out with ideas, questions, or to let us know how we can better support your advocacy on your donor journey. On behalf of all of us at ADL, thank you for your steadfast partnership and commitment. Thank you.